Hello, my name is Natalia Batista. I'm one of the invited guests. I'm a manga artist from Sweden. My manga is being published in different countries. My manga is Sword Princess Amaltea, but there's actually a new translation into Czech, in the Czech language. I don't know how to pronounce Princesa Cernica Amaltea. It's good? Yeah? Kinda. I try. So this is the Czech version, and I also have the version in German and Italian, and of course in Swedish. So I wanted to do a presentation about how I made this manga, because it was a travel to get here. And first of all, I want to begin with talking about what is manga. Of course, we know what manga is, but I guess some of you might ask, can a non-Japanese person do manga? And let's address this first of all. I think a non-Japanese person can do manga as well. For me, manga is like a recipe. It's almost like pasta. You don't have to be Italian to do pasta. You can learn the recipe of pasta, and if you use the right ingredients, you can do pasta in your country, and you don't have to be Italian to do it. And the same thing is with manga. If you learn the ingredients of manga, the storytelling, the character design, the character development, and the whole putting together a manga with certain techniques, you can do manga in your language, in your country. So for me, manga is universal. And I also talk to my Japanese friends about this, and they see my stuff and say, yeah, this is manga. So I don't judge. I think manga could be for anyone, and that's my opinion. If you have another opinion, we can discuss that in the questionnaires afterwards. It would be interesting. But so I will talk about manga as a global world of a kind of comic style or comics form, more like an art form. And for me, manga is something you can do anywhere. So first I wanted to talk a little bit about who I am. I'm a comic artist in Sweden. I've been doing comics professionally for 12 years. I started doing it from when I was from college. I finished college, and then I wanted to study comics. And fortunately, in my town, there is a comic school, actually. And this comic school is called Serieskolan, or Comic Art School. So it's a 2-year study. The first year, you do a lot of lessons and you do exercises, short comics, a lot of short comics. And this is my recommendation for you artists out there who want to do comics and manga. Start doing short stories. Because one of the hardest part of doing a comic is to finish it, to do a good ending. It's not hard to start a story and to do interesting characters and the interesting world, but the hardest part is to wrap up the sack and do a good ending that the reader wants to feel like the story is ended. So that's why I recommend you to do short stories. And I started doing a lot of short stories, sending it to competitions, both nationally and internationally. And today there's actually several big manga competitions you can participate in. So I recommend you to Google, search for competitions, follow the rules, and usually they want you to do short comics. So that's my recommendation. I also, at the Comic Art School, started my own company together with my friends. We started out as just a collective, or kind of like a fan group. We all did manga together, and we call ourselves No Speed Studio. And today we are the only, sadly, publisher in Sweden who publish manga. We don't publish Japanese manga, we mostly publish Swedish manga, but we are also looking for international manga that is non-Japanese, that is not available on Scandinavian sites or on the internet. So if there is any good Czech Republican artists, we are interested in publishing it in Sweden as well. So I think what is growing right now, and I will talk more about that, about my manga, is kind of a community in Europe where publishers are publishing European artists and showing how many and American artists, of course, and other international artists that are non-Japanese, just to show how much talent there is outside of Japan, still in manga form. Also, one of my first, after I did a lot of short stories during my years at the comic art school, I actually did one long story, which was called A Song for Release. It was my first really, really long, like more than 100 pages. It was 200, almost 200 pages. And I made it as a webcomic as well. And this is also another thing that I recommend you artists to check into. Webcomics today is, in my opinion, the best way to earn money from doing comics. Even though it's a big, ego boost to see your comic in a printed form, sadly, books are not paying my bills. I do a lot of other stuff. I work as a comic art teacher at the comic art school. I also do lessons and workshops and presentations at libraries and schools, and that kind of pay my bills. A little bit of my money comes from my books, but it takes time to get to that point. You can't start doing manga and then suddenly someone pays you a monthly wage or something. You have to get to that point. And still at 12 years of working with this, I still have a struggle of just living from my manga, so I think it's better to try to be a little bit broad, to find different kinds of way to earn money from your stories. And my recommendation is to start with short stories and then actually do a webcomic at some point. Because webcomics today is kind of like a good start. You learn to produce, learn to deliver, to show it to the world. And many of us artists are shy and maybe don't want to show our stuff. And the internet is a good place because you don't have to face another person. You can just put it up there and see what people think. So it's a good way to interact and get followers. And that was what I did with A Song for Release in 2009. This was almost 10 years ago, so it was another time. Today there's a lot more platforms, so I urge you to check up the internet as a publishing place. My first actual manga that I did, book, my debut, was this book called Meow. This is a manga that is published in Sweden, and it's also now published in Germany and also going to be published in America. So this manga was my debut in the Swedish community, and I started doing comics because I wanted to tell stories. The problem is that what I had to realize was that you have to check up what the market wants you to produce. Sadly, a lot of us artists can't make the stories we want to do, but we rather have to shape them in the picture of what the editor think manga is. So even though I know, and we all know, that there are manga readers that are young and old and have many different preferences and ideas, even though that's the truth, the problem is that we all have to listen to what the editors think manga is. So in Sweden, editors thought manga was for kids. They say, oh, manga is a kid's thing, so I had to make a kid's manga. So this is a very young kids manga. It's about cats, and they have cat ears. And we know it's very common in the manga community with these characters. When I actually printed it in Sweden, I got some reviews said, "Oh, this is very original that they have cat ears." It's like, no. It's not original. We know it's not original. It's very common in manga. But for the non-manga fans, they thought it was original. So it sold very well in Sweden. And it's still selling. It's 8 years old, but it's still selling in Sweden. And that was fun. I also illustrate a lot of children's books. And this is actually paying more money to me than my actual manga work. And this is sad, but true. So I recommend you, if you want to do manga, also do some illustration work for magazines or children's books or companies. It's a good way to pay your bills in the end. I'm also an organizer of a festival in my hometown for fanzines. And this is also another thing I want to recommend to you, because the whole comics community and the whole manga community, it's a lot based on the context you have. Network is so important. So I urge you to start visiting artist alleys. Even if you're not selling at artist alley, you can still walk around and talk to people, get their cards, interact with them online, build a community. Like Animefest, the theme of this Animefest is community, and this is so important among us artists. We have to build it together. Because there's no industry that we fight over. We have to build this industry together. So it's very important that we build a network, and that's why I also engage in, I organize projects, I organize fanzine festivals to let other artists show their work, because I think that's very important. I don't want to stand here and just talk about me. I want to help others also reach a level of professionalism. So that's important to me as well. Okay, now on to the manga book. Let's see. Yeah. So this story, I came up with a story in 2010. It was because I was doing my manga, A Song for Release. I had just finished it and I had sent it to Tokyopop in Germany. And Tokyopop in Germany published it, and then they asked me for another story. And I really wanted to do an action story and try out doing action. How do you draw action poses and action scenes? But I wanted a strong female character. And they said, okay, design something for us and pitch it to us. So this was actually my pitch for German Tokyopop. And I wanted to do a matriarchal fantasy, because at this point I was very inspired by Game of Thrones. I bet many of you already seen Game of Thrones, and many other, like Lord of the Rings, and a lot of these very, very famous fantasy stories that we see on movies and in books. They are usually about men interacting with other men, fighting other men, engaging somehow with other men, and the women stand in the side corner and don't really do much. And this is sad. I thought, why, if we can come up with stories with dragons and demons and unnatural stuff and magic, why can't we come up with a power structure that is different from our world? Why do we have to focus on a patriarchal society every time? I mean, there's much more interest in playing with the dynamics and playing with the power structure. Who is in power? So I wanted to do a story where the women are in power, because the story is focused on a world where the magic, the power of magic, is only controlled by women. The women can draw down the moon, just like we kind of think of Wicca, and the women can control the power and fight with it. But men can't learn the power of magic, and this evolves into a structure where the society think of men as weak, as not powerful, as an object for women to control. So it's not feminist. It's not feminist. I just want to clear for you, this is not feminism. This is a very satirical story about how would the world be if we started over but we had another structure, and how terrible it would be for men. So it's kind of like a play with this. Another of my inspirations for this story is Egalia's Daughters, or Daughters of Egalia. This is a Norwegian novel, not a graphic novel. It's actually a book. I read it when I was 15. It's about a world where the men can't vote. And the main character, which is a man, he starts a man's party to create a movement where the men can earn the right to vote. And in this society, the women can beat their husband, the women can force the husband to do anything for them. It's a very bad society. It's a very sexist society. And I was really inspired by this, and I thought, could I make a new version of this? Because the book is from the 70s. It's like a hippie book from the 70s era. And I wanted to do a new version that the kids would read. And I know that manga is something we like, it's a new thing. Fantasy is also something that young people like. So I thought I will do a manga, a fantasy manga, inspired by Daughters of Regalia. So this is a book I recommend you to read if you want to. I am also very inspired by Kaoru Mori. Have someone read her work? She's made the manga Emma and also A Bride's Story. It's a very good manga. If you like really detailed manga with historical settings or kind of a fantasy-ish, but still in a very real society. This story is about north side of, I think it's kind of Caucasia, Mongolia or something, and she's a princess. The character in this story is a princess, but she has to marry someone in this society, and she marries a small boy because that's the only eligible man in the city, and that means she's kind of independent because the small boy can't be her husband. She's more like his bigger sister. So it's a very independent woman in a society where you have a lot of demands on the woman. So I think A Bride's Story is a good thing to read as well. You can get inspired by that. A little bit about the process, because I bet there are some of you that also work on their own stories, on your own mangas maybe, and I want to give some inspiration for you how to create your own manga. So I started in 2011 and 12 to do research and do a lot of manuscript writing. And I realized pretty early that I have done very short stories and I couldn't do an epic story. I needed to learn how to do an epic long story. So I actually read a book called Anatomy of Story by John Truby. This is a screenwriting storybook, or how to do screenwriting. He is a teacher in America for screenwriting for movies in LA. And his book is actually divided into chapters, and every chapter ends with a writing exercise. So every chapter goes through character development, storyline, the world, the power struggles, like everything in this story you want to build. And when you go through the book and you do the writing exercises, in the end, you have your whole story written down. So I did that. I went through the whole book and I made 20 pages of just my whole manga. And that's what I had in the beginning. And that was all I needed. And then I could start doing my manga. So I urge you, if you want to do your own stories, write down the story, even the ending. There's a misconception in the manga community that you can start a story and you don't have to know the ending. And this is a big mistake. I recommend you to not do this mistake. Always know where the ending is. Just like if we talk about the recipes again, if you don't know what dish you're doing, why the point of doing it? Like, is it pasta? Is it a cake? Is it a soup? If you don't know what dish you're doing, it will be hard to do it. So you have to know the ending, to know the result. What is the result of the manga? And that's easier to make the manga. So always come up with that. You can change it, you can tweak it a little bit during the process, but my recommendation is to have the whole story written down before you do it. And I did a first chapter. So this is actually a fanzine, a small magazine that I printed in a copy machine, and I did a cover for it, like 30 or 40 pages, very small. And then I sent this to publishers and showed it to them and said, this is what I want to do. I want to do 3 books out of this story. And I got one reply, one that said yes, and it was Kolik, which is was a publisher in Sweden. They actually finished their publishing last year, but they published my manga finally. So they published 3 books of my manga. And so then we come up to the next step. After me doing the whole preparations and research, and then also doing the manuscript and getting a book deal signed, Then I went on to working with it. And also my recommendation about signing contracts, first of all, always read through the contract very carefully. Don't sign anything that you don't understand. Always read through it and talk to other artists if the contract looks good. Because the big mistake I've seen so many artists do is sign a contract that in the end limits their possibilities and rights. So always make sure you sign good contracts. That's very important. And also in that, what I did was I signed a contract that was for all 3 books. And this is also important because I've seen other manga artists who sign 1 contract per book, and then the publisher quit the series halfway through, so you can't finish the series. And that's a big problem, because the fans really want the ending. So make sure to sign the whole series or nothing. That's my recommendation. So I started working with the series for 3 years. It took me 1 year per volume, approximately. I had assistants. I want to be clear with that, because doing 1 book in 1 year is really, really hard alone. So I recommend you, and that's also why I want you to have a network of friends and artists. Have a network that can help you out. If you need someone to make the backgrounds or put in the text or put the flats or anything, have someone help you. And then you can help them back later. So we can help each other. And that's very important in this community, that we see each other not as enemies, but as helpers who can help each other. So have a network, help each other, and be assistants to each other. It's also a good way to learn, because you see how the other people work and you learn from that. So I had 4 helpers who helped me out, assistants. I also got a youth award for this 2nd book. There was a competition where they let the young people read the comics and then choose which ones they like. And I got 2nd place in that in Sweden, so it was kind of fun. It means that people actually read my book and actually liked it. And that means a lot to me, I think. And so far in Sweden, it has sold over 8,000 copies, which is a lot in Sweden, because Sweden is very small. We are only 10 million people, and only like a few of them read comics. Comics is not a big thing in Sweden. So mostly a comic book sells for 500 to 1,000 copies. So 8,000 was good, because it reached us, the manga audience. And this is what I always tell the editors and the publishers in Sweden: manga sells, because people want to read manga. And that's why I think it's weird that Nosebleed Studio is the only manga publisher in Sweden. There is money to be earned from manga. Yeah. Next one is... Okay, so I want to show a little bit of how I work. This is actually my sketches. So the sketches are digital. And that's because then I can move things around, I can make things bigger or smaller. It's much easier. So if you have some kind of drawing tablet, or you have a drawing screen, or if you have a kind of an iPad or some kind of pad that you can actually draw on with a pen, that's really good, because then you can change you can write the text digitally, and you can change your design or your pages easily. So my recommendation is to first do a manuscript, and then do these kind of simple sketches. These are very detailed, but it doesn't have to be this detailed. It could be much simpler with just stick figures, it's okay. As long as someone else can read it and understand what it says, what it has, what the picture has to tell. Because the next step is you let someone read it. You let your friends, your family, preferably someone that don't read comics, because then they can give you feedback that you couldn't get otherwise. Like your grandmother, or your little sister, or maybe someone, your teacher or something that doesn't know comics. And they can say, oh, I don't understand this, or I don't understand this. And it's much better to make it very clear what is happening in the page, if someone who's not used to reading manga can see the mistakes you do. So sketching is very important. The next step is actually I use my computer screen. I have a laptop, and I put the brightness on maximum, and then I actually use it as a light table. It's a very old laptop, so I don't care much for it. And I put the paper on top of it, and I zoom in on the picture in the right size, and then I just trace it. Actually, my boyfriend had to do a lot of the tracing, the boring part, just tracing the sketches. And then on the new paper, I clean up the sketching, and then I ink on that. So I ink on top of a paper. I do, because I prefer inking by hand. If you go to my YouTube channel, I have a lot of videos where I ink with steel nibs. Steel nibs is, you dip it in ink, and it has like almost like a goose pen. It looks like a goose pen with two metal pigs, and you dip it in ink, and then you draw very beautiful lines. A lot of manga artists in Japan use it, a lot of manga artists in Europe as well. There are some artists that go to do it digital, and a lot of the digital program actually imitates the steel nibs. So this is a good thing to learn the steel nibs, because then it's easier for you to learn to actually do the inking digitally as well. So I recommend you to practice both. In the beginning, it's really a pain in the neck to learn it, but after some practice, it's really good for you to have this knowledge to how to ink. So this is how the pages look when they're finished. They are inked by hand, and then I scan them, and then I put these kind of gray tones digital in Photoshop. But there's also Clip Studio Paint, Manga Studio. There's a lot of different programs that can help you with doing screen tones. I could not give you a lesson right now in screen tones, because it's probably a 3-hour lesson about what you should think about. But just remember to do a lot of research beforehand. And I want to recommend you to go to YouTube. There are so many good manga artists who do their own YouTube channels about how to do manga. Several of them do videos on storytelling and character design, but also on how to screen tone, how to print your books, how to go to events, how to sell it to bookstores, the whole process. And that's very learning. So also about the community, us manga artists, we should help each other out and keep the information free, so we can learn from each other. So the final rendition need to be high resolution to be able to print it in a book. So these pages are really, like, you can see the lines are really, really clear, and that's because they are high resolution. So also, if you work digitally, if you work in your computer, make sure to have a high resolution, DPI, high DPI. Very important. So yeah, after 3 years of working with a manga, during 2016, I was mostly selling the manga in Sweden, and I got a little bit frustrated that I couldn't get it outside of Sweden. I wanted to find publishers. So in the beginning of 2017, I want to tell you the story just so you know how I got published internationally. In the end of 2016 and beginning of 2017, I started searching for publishers internationally, because being published in Sweden is not enough money-wise. It's so small. It's such a small area, with the language. So you have to be published in at least 5 or 6 other countries to be able to make a good payment. If I count how much money I get from the Swedish book, this is a Swedish version. There's 3 books, actually. If I count how much money I get from this, and I divide it in how many hours I worked, I think I'm down to maybe €1 an hour. It's a really bad wage. So don't think you get a good wage from doing manga. But I can raise that hourly wage by getting it published in different countries and getting money from different countries. So when you actually finish a story, and you're proud of it, start getting it out into different, and license it into different countries. And this is also why you should sign only good contracts, because if you sign a contract where you lose the international rights, you cannot sell it internationally. I made sure to have the international rights for myself, so I could sell it internationally. And what I did was I went into to Facebook and started joining different comics groups for comic artists who wanted to join other markets. So there's several of them. I recommend you to be active on Facebook and different Facebook groups. And I wrote there, I want to get an agent for American market, for example. And then a guy contacted me and he said, let's do a Kickstarter for Meow, for the small children's book I did. And we did a Kickstarter, and then the publisher of Tokyopop in America saw the Kickstarter and said, oh, that was too bad you signed this book to them. Now I can publish it. And I said, I have another one. I have Amaltea. Would you like Amaltea instead? So they signed the Tokyopop in America. They signed the Amaltea version for English. So it will be published in June in America. I'm going there to sell it. And during that time, the publisher Pyramond in Germany also got their eyes on it. And at this point, I already had it out in Sweden and in Italy, because I went to Italy to a convention and showed it to publishers and found one there. So this kind of double or triple, quadruple publishing internationally is because I did several different things. First of all, Facebook groups, very important. Second of all, I go to events. I take my time. Instead of like putting my money into like a vacation trip to Hawaii or something, or Mallorca or something, instead I put my money into going to events. So this is my vacation, kinda. I go to comic events all over the world. I've been to New York Comic Con. I've been to Lucca Festival in Italy, for example. I've been to several German manga conventions. And this is a very good idea for you manga comic artists who want to be published. Go out, seek other artists, get contacts, because that's a good way. If they see you are a kind and genuine person, they will recommend you to their publisher. So this is a lot of these publishings was because I did a lot of trips. So I paid a lot of money for these trips, but I also got a lot of contacts and networking out of it. So that's my recommendation. So in the end, this is hopefully just a start. I hope that I can get it into France at some point, because France is the second biggest comics market in the world after Japan. So that's another goal on my list, but it takes time. It takes a lot of time. Yeah, a little bit short about what decisions I had during the production. I'm just gonna double check the time. Yeah, okay. In my manga, I had some special goals for what I wanted to do with the manga. And during my work process, I had to do have some active decisions that connects to the characters and the world and how you build it. So first of all, I wanted women in the main roles. That was very important for me. Second of all, I wanted to talk about gender norms, about what is a woman and a man, and why do we divide them in power together? Like, why do we say women are not strong, and why do we say that men can't take care of children? Why do we say these things? Why are they true? Is there a reason for this? And something I wanted to play with, just to make a commentary. And I recommend you, artists and creators yourself, to actually think about how can I make this story of yours interesting to others. And one way is to make it more general, make it a commentary on the whole world. Like, why do we treat animals a certain way? Why do we treat the planet in a certain way? Why do we make it a statement, but also more like a question? Make it so that the reader want to question norms or question the society. It doesn't have to be a political statement like you should think this. That's not a good book. That's a party program. That's not interesting. The interesting thing is when you ask questions and the reader have to discuss it with themselves. So I ask questions about responsibilities and rights. Who has the right in this world? Who has the responsibilities? Like the prince in my manga, he's very clear that he's a prince, so he should be taken care of. So the princess have to pay for everything. The princess should take care of him. And that's a responsibility that he expects from her in this world. Just like kind of women or the society expects things from a gentleman in our world. The sexual power and sexual dominance, the fact that the men can't be protecting their own bodies in this world. The women can like force themselves on the men. That's very like a sexual power, a sexual fear is something that also dominates in a society. So I wanted to include that. Economic power as well, and economic power not between the gender only, but also between ethnicities. The fact that so many of our fantasy stories show darker characters in exotic societies, and not showing that darker characters can be fully like normal. They can be queens or do anything like in a society together with white people. So I made sure that I had a mix of ethnicities. Actually, the prince was from the beginning meant to be a fair prince with fair skin and blonde hair. But then when I saw the manga pages, the finished product, I saw that he was so light and fair-skinned that he almost disappeared on the paper. You didn't see the prince. He was only a few lines, and he was too white. So I added some color to him, and it actually helped him stand out on the page and make him much more interesting to read the manga. So I think also we should question, why do we make white characters? Why don't we make more colored characters? Characters that are more voluptuous and not so skinny? Why do we make characters a certain way? And question all these norms, because they are more interesting if we question them. And also the question of body hair. So one thing I made very sure in, and also body shapes. Something I made very sure in my manga is that the women, they vary in sizes. So some are big, some are small, some are tall, some are short. They're very different, fair skin, light skin. While the men in my manga, the very few men I have in Amaltea, is always the same size. And this is an issue for me, because when we watch Game of Thrones, when we watch Lord of the Rings, the very few women are almost always, with very few exceptions, measured in the same body size and body type. And you know the kind of body type, skinny and big boobs and big ass, like kind of that body size. And it's like, it gets boring, because we know that women don't look like that. We know that we come in many sizes. And I wanted to show the same, okay, might sound weird, but I wanted you guys who read my manga to get annoyed. The same way I get annoyed when I see Game of Thrones or when I see Lord of the Rings. I wanted you to say, why is the man always skinny? Why is the man always this way? Another thing, I removed all facial hair. So men don't have facial hair in my manga. Because I wanted to show how weird it is that, for example, Xena warrior princess, she's fighting in the woods, fighting monsters, she's always shaved under her arms and her legs. How does she have the time to shave her body? Like, there's so much work. And I wanted you to have the same feeling of illogical feeling of, why is the man always shaved? So the prince, he's in the woods for so much time, but he never shaves, and you never see him shave. And this is I made this very, very thoughtfully. Another thing that I wanted to make sure that you understood with the comic is that the comic is not meant to be a depiction of a good society. It's meant to be a bad society, and you should be angry from it. So I really hope that you get that this is not a perfect feminist society. This is a very satire society. Yeah, so I'm pretty much getting to the end now. And I'm thinking of if there's some questions you have. Have someone had a chance to maybe check it out also? Or if you have questions about your own, like, how do I become a manga artist? Where do I go? What conventions do you like? Yeah, you have a question here?
How do you decide when you have a story and you said that it's good to know the ending? What do you do when you have multiple ideas for multiple endings and they all could fit into the theme and narrative and the atmosphere? That's
a good question. My idea is that I think it's better to decide for one ending, and if you have a hard time, maybe ask some friends, do a survey among your friends, and let your friends help you out. Because if you have multiple endings, it will be hard for you to plan the story to focus on that ending. It will feel more like a game where you have different endings, you know, like a visual novel. Maybe you should do it as a visual novel instead. If you have good endings, if you have multiple good endings, make a visual novel instead. But if you have one good ending, do a manga. Because sadly, manga is linear. It's only towards one ending. But a game, you can have multiple endings. Good question. Some other questions? Yeah?
When you ink a page, how big is it?
How long it take?
No. How big it is?
Oh, good question. Good question. I use, this is a very important thing when you do comics. Make sure to draw bigger than the actual print. So what I draw on a B4. B4 is between A4 and A3. So it's a little bit in between. Because I think A4 is too small and A3 is too big, so B4 is in between, and it's actually the manga size. So if you go online and you look for manga paper, you usually get them in B4 size. And usually you also get them with certain pre-printed lines on the paper, and that's very good because they have the lines for where you put your frames, your actual manga frames, to what point you have to draw the lines and everything. So they explain how you use the kind of form for the format. But I like that. So look for manga paper. More questions about manga? Yeah. Good questions. It's very good questions.
So earlier you recommended to publish webcomics. How do you earn with a webcomic?
How you earn money from doing webcomics? There's different ways. First of all, webcomics, some platforms actually let you earn money from them. So some platforms, in the beginning, you might be a new artist and you might not get it. But when you earn more fans, you might end up becoming one of their artists and they will pay you monthly. For example, Webtoons have some comic artists they do this with, Tapas as well, that you are a paid artist. But even as a new artist, you can start publishing your comic and also have a Patreon page, like a lot of YouTubers. So Patreon is very good for YouTube and for webcomic artists who produce something every month or every week. So that means you have to publish regularly, every week something, and then you have a Patreon page where your fans can give money to you, and you get the money if you publish every week. So if you stop publishing, you don't get any money, but if they give money and you keep publishing, you get money from that. Also, some of the pages actually let the fans tip you, give you some tip. So a lot of the artists actually get some extra money from that. And altogether, that's one way to earn money from the webcomic, but also you can also earn money from the commission work you get from your webcomic. So by showing your comic and putting it out there and getting like interest, some people can find you and say, oh, I want you to illustrate my book, or I want you to illustrate this magazine article, or I can pay you to do this book for me. And those kind of work will pay you as well. So the webcomic is both a platform for earning money, but also kind of like a trampoline into a professional business. And that's why I recommend webcomics. And also it's a good practice. Even if you don't want to work professionally, you want just to learn to do comics, webcomics makes you produce a lot, because you have to produce every week something new, and that gives you a lot of practice. So the best idea for the ones of you who are very new is just draw every day, every week, a little bit. And that's why webcomics are good, because it forces you to do that. More questions? Yeah, we have another one. Yeah, over there.
If you start publishing a webcomic, how do you gain a following? Like, there is so much content out there, so what do you have to do to make your work stand out, or how to get people to look at it without like spamming servers again and again?
Good question. And if I knew this question, the answer to this question, I would be famous on the internet. So there's not really one answer to this. There is several ways. The best thing is always to be very active on any platform that you put your stuff on. You can't just go to a website and start putting it up and then leave. You have to interact with your fans. You have to do competitions for your fans, polls, anything that interacts with your fans. And be very kind to your fans, because they can be like commercial advertisers. So they go around and tell their friends about it. So a lot of the fans, a lot of the popular comics, they have fans that are very passionate and help them out. Another way is to have a certain niche. Is there something that is very specific that you can do? I don't know if you know the webcomic Beelzebubs by a Finnish artist, J.P. Ahonen. It's a comic about death metal, a death metal family, and they all have death metal makeup. And you've probably seen it on Facebook. It's very popular. And what he did is he took a niche. He's into death metal. He likes music. So he made strip comics, short comics about a family that is kind of like a death metal family. And everybody who is into death metal but also know about metal, and it's quite wide. And everybody who is our fans are just fans of metal, they like the comic. So he find his niche. And that's my recommendation, to find something that is typical for you, that you really know a lot about, and do that niche. If that's horse riding or football or something like that, do a comic about it, and then you will find the fans. So find your niche. Don't try to make something very, like, for example, Sarah Scribbles, if you know Sarah Scribbles, who wants to do like strip comics about how to be awkward and introvert and kind of a youth that have to take responsibilities and but doesn't want to be grown up. That's a very niche thing. It seems like she's just talking about her life, but really her personality is very specific, and that's why it becomes a niche. So my recommendation is to find your niche and to find that audience and to focus on that. Don't be too wide. Don't think everybody will like it. Find one specific target group. And then make a lot of interactions and advertises. And also, of course, community. Make a community. Be sure you're active in the community to not only focus on yourself, but with others. Recommend other webcomics and they will recommend you. Do fan art for others and they will do fan art for you. So that kind of interaction with other artists is very important as well. And it just takes time. I have friends who started a webcomic, and after 2 or 3 years it took off. But before that it was almost flat. And you have to have that spike. But you don't get that unless you just keep on working. You have to just be diligent. Yes. Okay. And last question, and then we finish.
I'd like to ask, how do you transform the manuscript into the sketches? Basically, how do you develop your compositions?
And from the
manuscript.
Manuscript to my pages.
Yes.
Okay, so the first step is write down what you think should happen. Like first scene, second scene, like just write it down, everything. Don't be too detailed, keep that for later. And then you should do a dialogue manuscript, almost like a theater. Think of the characters as actors, and you are the screenplay writer, and the actors should be able to read the actual manuscript. And that's why actually let 2 friends read it out loud for you later on. It's a little bit embarrassing, but it's fun. So they can actually read it like a theater for you, and then you can see, oh no, the character can say that, that's weird. Oh no, that sounds bad. So just see how the interaction actually is. And my best recommendation is to take your cell phone and your headset and go out, take a walk somewhere where no one hears you, and just talk like you were the characters. It sounds really weird because it sounds like but people will think you're in a telephone conversation, so it's not a problem. But just speak all the lines and just speak and just record it in your phone, and then you can go home and listen to it and pick out the good parts. That's my recommendation, to just take walks and just speak your whole manuscript. And then when you have the dialogues, it's much easier to do the actual pages. Then you can think, okay, the characters say this and this. What is the scene? How do I frame it? And read a lot of manga. Read a lot of comics, different kind of manga and different kind of comics, and learn from looking at how other people do it. Actually, you can easily copy someone's style, drawing style, but you can't really copy someone's storytelling style. So the storytelling is something you learn, and it will be very personal to you. So you will learn how to storytell, but it's just practice, practice, practice. So this is my recommendation. Okay, thank you so much. And if you have more questions, you can either add me on Facebook, and you can also talk to me on Instagram, and also in the Artist Alley. I will be there as well, and sign the book, so you can check out the book as well. Thank you.
A nebo ty postele se mi taky líbily, teda? Ty postele, jo? A dýmky k nim, prostě dýmky k nim budou.
Plišák. Plišák pro každého.
A všude válendy.
Ty jak?
Jo, to je hodně